Good morning, this is Nigel Farage bringing you the latest edition of Phone Farage on LBC. I'm here for the next 30 minutes to taking your calls on a week when there's been a lot happening. This is your chance to put any question you like to me and I'll do my best to answer. So the number for you to get in touch is 0345 60 60 973. And don't forget, you can also watch Phone Farage on the website lbc.co.uk. And we will go straight to our first caller, and that is Sarah in Hammersmith. Good morning.
Good morning, John. My question is, do you think the UK should bomb Syria?
Not on the terms that are currently being offered. No, I don't. I listened to the Prime Minister yesterday. He seemed to be saying the main reason that we had to bomb Syria was that the Americans and the French are bombing Syria, so we must be good and, show that we support our allies. Well, that's fine if they're doing the right thing. But don't forget, the Americans have been bombing Syria for the last year. In fact, they've launched, I think, nearly 4,000 bombing missions on Syria in the last year. And would we say the ISIS threat was less in Syria a year after this bombing than it was before? Well, I rather doubt we would. It also seemed to me that David Cameron was saying, look, if we do this and we bomb Syria, the whole global jihadism thing will just melt away. Well, I'm sorry, but I heard that about taking on the Taliban in Afghanistan 15 years ago. Do you remember Tony Blair telling us, if we did this, we'd make the streets of Britain safer? We then went into a war in Iraq, which is still rumbling on in many ways. We then bombed Libya and made the place less stable. I would suggest, Sarah, that David Cameron's track record on foreign policy is bad. And it was just 2 years ago that he was saying to us, we must arm the rebels to fight Assad. Had we done that, we would have aided ISIS, and now we want to bomb them. But it's okay, because there are 70,000 people, apparently, in the Free Syrian Army who we've now decided are the good guys. To me, Sarah, this doesn't add up. I am not a pacifist. I'm not a person that says, you should never go to war, far from it. But I think to go to war, you need to be absolutely clear in what your aims and goals are. I mean, are we supporting Assad or aren't we? I mean, just exactly where do we stand with this? There needs to be a long-term global strategy. And finally, if we're serious about wanting to take on ISIS militarily, you can't do it in one country. You've got to do it in several countries simultaneously, and bombing without sufficient ground forces never, ever works. Sarah, what do you think?
Well, I totally agree with you. I think it's about time we start thinking with our brains rather than our bombs.
Yes, I mean, there's an awful lot of knee-jerk stuff, isn't there? The main reason for taking out Saddam was that the Americans wanted revenge over 9/11. And you could see, couldn't you, with President Hollande, this awful thing has happened in Paris, and the next day we're launching airstrikes, and the British have said that if they want to use our air base in Cyprus, they can use that, for support missions or whatever it is. Knee-jerk reactions, you're right.
How is ISIS, ISIL, whatever you want to call it, Mr. Farage, how is it to be defeated then?
Well, to defeat an ideology as opposed to an army in uniform, it's much harder, isn't it? You fight an army in the field, and that can be tough enough, but you know exactly who the enemy is. When you have, in the case of ISIS, not just soldiers with their military wagons and their rocket launchers, but we've got them in London. And we've got them in Paris. I mean, this is not an easy thing to do. I would say on the military side of things, there would need to be a genuine grand coalition.
Russia, presumably.
Well, how can it not be?
Well, Ken Livingstone in the last half hour, and we'll get on, because I don't know whether you saw the BBC last night. He's in degree of hot water because he blamed the 7 July bombings on Tony Blair. He says that Tony Blair was given clear and credible evidence by British intelligence services that any attack could lead to a terrorist atrocity in London. Do you think Ken Livingstone was fair in what he said last night?
To say that we shouldn't do something because we fear reprisals isn't necessarily a very good argument. I mean, that would be an argument for never doing anything. So I don't really buy that. But that doesn't mean I supported Tony Blair's wars, and it doesn't mean I've supported Cameron's wars, and I want us to support the right wars where we have a clear long-term objective. Blair, Blair, when he launched the Iraq war, the reason was regime change. without any thought for what came afterwards. So I'd be deeply critical of Blair for that reason. But to say that we shouldn't do anything around the world in case people reprise against us, look, do you know what? Whatever we do in Syria, whether we bomb or not, we still face a threat on London streets anyway.
And lastly on this, Ken Livingstone said the alliance should include Nigeria because of Boko Haram, should include China, should include Russia.
Well, actually, of course he's right. Because how on earth can you take on ISIS unless you're doing it simultaneously in Kenya, Nigeria, Yemen, and right across this whole area? And I think ultimately, and you asked the right question, the European Union and the West view Putin as the devil. They want to view Putin as the devil. And I'm not saying that I want to take him round to meet Mum for tea on Sunday afternoon, and you as a journalist would hate. In fact, you wouldn't last long, Nick.
I would not.
Get rid of Ferrari, send him off to Moscow.
Well, that has some merits then.
and he'll be gone in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
But the point is that on this bigger overall battle, we need to start recognising we're on the same side. And you may remember that in the debates against Nick Clegg last year, in the run-up to the European elections, the debate that you hosted, Clegg and I had a furious row over this. And I was pointing out then that, you haven't got to like somebody to be their ally. And there is this, and, it's not a perfect analogy, but we did work with Stalin against Hitler. And I'm not saying we're quite at that position yet, but if we're going to beat ISIS, we have to recognise Putin's on that side. And maybe we have to swallow really hard, Mr. Cameron, and we have to say to ourselves, perhaps even Assad is on that side as well. And again, that question by the Prime Minister simply has not been answered. We move on to Roger in Woodford Green. Roger, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Nigel. The question I've got just around the shooting down of the Russian plane a few days ago that I think most people agree was on its way back to base after bombing terrorists that we're all meant to be against. Is that an act of war, or could it be seen as a potential act of war? And therefore, if it's any of those two, is that not a serious thing to have happened?
Well, doesn't it just show you, Roger, the danger of intervening militarily in a situation as complex as Syria? There are all sorts of different sides involved here, and sometimes history shows that one spark, can lead to a huge number of unintended and perhaps fatal consequences. I'm not quite sure what was going through Turkey's mind. We're told, I think the best intelligence we've got is that aeroplane was over their airspace for a total of 17 seconds. And at the point it was hit, clearly heading back into Syrian airspace. I have to say, Roger, deeply confused about the role of Turkey in all of this.
In what way confused, Mr. Farage?
I'm not sure whose side they're on. We've got.
Well, you think they're on ISIS's side?
Well, how do I put this? I think that
in your usual fashion, I would imagine.
Well, I think Turkey view the Kurds as being a bigger threat than ISIS. It is reputed that Turkey are buying much of the ISIS oil. I'm just not sure quite where Turkey's positioned on all of this. And I've been sort of looking at this all week, and it's quite tough to get around your head of all the different sides that are involved in this. But I'm certainly worried about Turkey's position. I'm worried about Turkey's perhaps sympathy towards ISIS. I'm worried about the fact that 8% of Turks in a recent opinion poll support ISIS actively.
8% of Turks?
8% of a country of 75 million.
How big, do we know how many people was in that sample?
No, I don't, but it was a reputable company that did a sort of global poll on attitudes towards jihadism.
What does this mean for the idea that Turkey should be part of the happy band that is the EU?
Again, here it is even more extraordinary. Angela Merkel almost unilaterally, a month ago, after a European summit, said, we are now going to give Turkey 3 billion euros. With that money, they'll be able to look after the flood of refugees better than they can. The deal is that they will try and stop lots of migrants crossing the Mediterranean to Europe. And in exchange for that, from the middle of 2016, all Turks will have access to the Schengen zone without visas, point one. And even more astonishingly, that we're now going to fast-track Turkey as members of the European Union. And those formal talks begin this weekend. And it's the one part of this jigsaw that's been missing, I think, from all the debate and conversation over the last few days. A lot of us very worried about Turkey's actions, worried about the relationship, or questioning at least about the relationship with ISIS, condemnatory of their bombing of the Kurds in northern Iraq, and really very worried about the shooting down of this jet.
We'd want them in NATO, though, wouldn't we, Mr. Farage?
Well, they've been in NATO for a very long time, and they have proved to be useful NATO members up until this point in time. But we are now, as I say, Turkey needs to make a decision at some point which way it goes. Yet, despite all of these questions, despite all of these problems, formal talks for Turkey to join the European Union are beginning now.
And the simple answer to this question is ask him, but do we know how Mr. Cameron views Turkey?
Mr. Cameron, in one of his first speeches as Conservative Party leader in 2005, said he very much wanted Turkey to be members of the European Union. George Osborne takes the same view. They've eulogised about this over the years. Even Conservative Eurosceptics like Dan Hannan think it's a marvellous idea for Turkey to join Europe.
But that's a game changer in any referendum, isn't it, Mr. Farage?
Well, I think it would be, yes. I think there are several points. The first one being, of course, that it would be complete free movement for 75 million more people even poorer per capita than those that live in Romania and Bulgaria. But secondly, there is this whole problem, and we are at last, I hope, beginning to have an honest conversation about extreme fundamentalism in our cities. If 8% of the population are sympathetic and support ISIS, what on earth would we want to give them open access to our countries for? So there are some big cultural issues there as well. If they push on with these Turkish negotiations, let's see if Mr. Cameron does yet another U-turn. But I believe that if the British government puts in a referendum, part of the package is that we're going to go into a political union with Turkey. I think the chances of us voting to leave would increase hugely.
We move on.
We do. We go to Stuart in Edgware. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. Were you shocked, Nigel, as I was yesterday, or Wednesday, when the so-called Shadow Chancellor threw the Little Red Book, Mao Zedong's book, at the George Osborne, a book written by the biggest mass murderer, torturer, killer in the history of the world.
Yeah, well done, Stuart. Well done. Because we all seem to think, that Hitler's top of the pops in the all-time baddies. And then people say, oh, no, Stalin killed more. Mao, under his regime, probably killed about 80 million people. He is the all-time number one when it comes to murdering his own people. I have to say, Stuart, shocked. No, not in the least. I think we need to get it into our heads that the Labour Party is now being led. The two people that lead the Labour Party are basically extremist fringe politicians. Mates with the IRA, supporters of Hamas and Hezbollah, people who regretted terribly the death of Osama bin Laden, and just for him to even come into his head that it was appropriate to quote Mao's Little Red Book, shows you the problem that Labour have got. They may well, over the course of the last 6 months since the election, activated a base of hard left young people in this country.
Well, that's what they'd say in defence. They'd say people are signing up in huge numbers.
No. Absolutely, they are. Lots of young people, and I was at the Oxford Union on Monday night, and it's clear there is a new wave of very active young.
The party would love that, surely, Mr. Farage.
Very left-wing people. Fine, very left-wing people. So on the face of it. Corbyn and McDonnell have this wonderful support and a growing party membership, but I would argue that it's fringe because it only actually targets a very, very narrow percentage of the overall electorate, leaving the rest of us repulsed by it. And I have to say, the last opinion polls I saw, Stuart, when people were asked the question, how would you vote if there was a general election tomorrow? And 27% said Labour. But I'm not sure the people answering that poll have really thought it through as yet. I suspect the Labour Party is in real, if not perhaps existential trouble under this leadership. That's my view. I suspect, Stuart, you rather agree with that, do you?
What it was that the unions, when it comes to £3 to join, the unions pay for all these people. Every Trotskyite, every communist you could get has joined the Labour Party, infiltrated it. In every level, they're all over the country. And some of them, the ones that the unions didn't pay for, they probably, instead of buying 20,000, they probably bought 10 out of their benefit money. And every nutcase going is joining the... It hasn't got the backing of the general Labour supporters at all. It's just a load of left-wing communist nutcases.
Well, Stuart, look, let's put it differently. They're perfectly entitled people to have these political opinions.
Yes.
And in Corbyn and McDonnell, they've got the best leaders they've ever had, and they will probably, in the years to come, as Labour shrinks, become a cult, that will meet high up in the Peak District for their annual conferences. That's how, the point is, at some point in time, Stuart, there is going to be a massive rebellion in the Labour Party.
Well, this leads me into this email, Mr. Farage.
Yeah, Stuart, by the way, thank you.
Stuart, thank you, Nigel. Graham in Bushy, could you ask Nigel Farage, with the turmoil in the Labour Party, has he had discussions with any current Labour MPs with regard to them defecting to UKIP?
No, not directly.
What does that mean, not directly?
No, because the conversations that we've had with Labour MPs have actually been more about the referendum, because, at some point between now and the end of 17, more likely next year, there's going to be an EU referendum. And as I've said before on this show, I don't regard these questions as being left-wing or right-wing. I believe them to be far bigger than that. And we need to have a referendum campaign with voices from across the spectrum. So the answer is no. We've been talking to them about the referendum. What happens next Thursday will be interesting. There is the first by-election of this Parliament takes place next Thursday. The constituency is Oldham West and Royton. It's a seat that Michael Meacher had held since 1970. One of Labour's safest seats in England. So, on the face of it, it should be
slam dunk,
an absolute cakewalk for Mr. Corbyn. But there's no doubt, and I think the weekend press will be speculating about this, there's no doubt that UKIP are on a bit of a charge. And the problem that Corbyn's got with those electors is there is a perception that perhaps the country is not safe if he was to become Prime Minister. And the reason, there's one very simple reason. And I've given you a long list of IRA sympathies, but there's one very simple reason. It was in the wake of Paris, the thought that, there's somebody in the shopping centre with a Kalashnikov and do the police shoot to kill or not? And Mr. Corbyn thought it rather better to go up to them with a jar of bonbons and say, well, have one of these, chum, and can we have a little chat? And so there is a perception that maybe the country wouldn't be safe under Corbyn. And so for his leadership, he's going to have to try and turn that around. But by the way, I'm not predicting UKIP will win the by-election because it is a safe Labour seat, but it could be very, very interesting. And maybe... if UKIP was to win and cause a massive upset, then the ructions then could be absolutely massive. And you could face, early in the new year, a Labour Party split in the sense that the Parliamentary Party would want to go in one direction and the new Labour Party that we've just talked about would want to go in another. So watch this space. We move on to Natalie in Weybridge.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Farage.
Good morning.
I'm a junior doctor, and I'd like to ask you about the planned junior doctors' strike next week. I note that before your descent into politics, you worked as a broker, and that during the last financial crisis, the public were told that bankers' bonuses couldn't possibly be removed for fear of losing a valuable asset to the country. Junior doctors are currently threatening to leave the NHS. Indeed, some are even threatening to leave the country if the government's proposals are brought into force next year. Do you think that the junior doctors are right to strike, and do you think that that Jeremy Hunt has treated us unfairly?
No, I don't really think you're right to strike, and I don't necessarily think there's much of a link between junior doctors and bankers. I'm sorry, I just don't really see that point. Look, junior doctors' hours have changed a lot over the course of the last few years. Not that I'm pretending for one moment that the job you do is easy, but from what I can, and maybe you can tell me, Natalie, that I'm wrong, but from what I can see, you are reasonably paid whilst you're being trained. And once you get qualified, you're in a very well-paid job. Now, there might be debates about conditions and all of those things, and I get that, and I've no doubt there are things that I don't understand. So you can help me with that. But hang on, one more thing. But the message you send out if you go on strike is not a very good one for your profession. But no, tell me what you think, please.
So you're incorrect in saying that we're well paid whilst we're trained. Whilst we're going through medical school, most medical students come out with a debt of around £80,000. Following training, a basic junior doctor's salary starts at around £25,000. There are many more jobs that these well-educated individuals could actually go into other than the NHS, and they're far well qualified to do those jobs. My main concern is that by imposing these changes in junior doctors, you are demeaning what it means to be a doctor, and that we are going to face a huge recruitment crisis to fill the posts that the NHS needs. I mean, the government are talking about bringing into force a 24/7 NHS. The NHS is actually already 24/7, and I can prove that because I work night shifts and weekends all the time. But in order to deliver that service, which is something that junior doctors are in agreement with, we would love to see an NHS that can work 24/7, but there is we just don't have the resources to spread ourselves any thinner than we already are across the ground.
Well, Judy, I mean, look, you said 25,000. My understanding is that with bits of overtime, the average salary for a working junior doctor is 40,000. But, either way, I still repeat my point that once you are qualified, you go into a world where you're very well paid, where the top people also get private consultancies on top of that, and that actually the medical profession over the last 15 years has fared better than almost any other sector of the professions in our country. So listen, I mean, I've no desire to have a fight with our junior doctors. I take your point.
You wouldn't be here, but for some doctors.
I've had more use of accident and emergency and junior doctors than most people through my life. So I've no desire to have a fight with you, Natalie, but I would just repeat this point that if you go on strike rather than extending negotiations, I think you will lose public support, and that's really all I would say. But
Natalie, thank you. We move on, Mr. Farage.
We do. We move on to Paul in Bow. Good morning.
Oh, hello there. The net immigration figure again, 380,000, similar to last year's. Only less than half of those are coming from the EU. So what I want to know is about 190, 200,000 are coming from elsewhere. Where are they coming from? How are they staying here? And it's a general thing. What would you think is a ballpark figure for net immigration that this country needs?
Yeah, lots of questions there, Paul. Point one, can I just say this? 50,000 people came last year from Romania and Bulgaria. Who was it that said that back in 2014? To be mocked and derided, especially by Nick Robinson, who was the BBC's chief political correspondent, openly mocking me for suggesting this. By the way, Paul, I don't believe these figures. And do you know why? Whilst there were 50,000 people shown to have come from Romania and Bulgaria last year, it looks like 100,000 people from Romania and Bulgaria were given national insurance numbers. And I'm not sure I believe these immigration statistics. They're based on passenger surveys, and I suspect we're actually grossly underestimating the number of people that are coming. So, a massive net immigration figure, half of which comes from the European Union, over which we have no control at all. Absolutely no control whatsoever. But you're quite right to point out a very large number of people are coming from the rest of the world.
45,000.
Where are they coming from? They're coming from China. They're coming from India. And why is the question? Well, in the case of a subcontinent, and we don't yet know the breakdowns, but one of the big factors here is family reunion. That family reunion is a very, very large factor. And we used to have something called the primary purpose rule, where we used to absolutely make sure that people who were coming here, genuinely were married or genuinely were direct relatives. And I'm not so sure we're on top of that. The other, of course, problem with many countries is sham marriages, accounting for thousands of people every year. The figure that I can't answer, Paul, because I don't know, is China. Why are such a large number of people coming from China? Is it that what we're getting from China are very highly skilled, well-paid migrants who are big net contributors to our society? It may be that's the case. I don't know the answer to that. And I would, and to sort of get to your final question, which is sort of where do we want to go in the future? Even if net migration of 1/3 a year, let's take the hypothesis that did overall make us economically better.
Which some argue it is.
Some argue it is, some argue it isn't. But I'm just, for the moment, just for argument's sake, saying that. But you have to balance against that, Paul, the impact on our schools, the impact on our hospitals, getting back to our junior doctor and the crisis in the NHS, the impact on housing, the impact on travel, the impact on quality of life, the impact on our increasingly divided societies in our towns and cities. And there are some things in life that matter more than simply looking at GDP figures.
About the impact on security, Mr. Farage?
Well, of course, the impact on security. And that sort of leads on from divided societies. And in some cases, actually, in some of our cities, parallel societies developing next to each other. So, Paul, I take the view that what we had from the 1950s up until the turn of the century, until Blair and Mandelson really got cracking, was we had net migration to Britain that averaged about 30,000 people a year over that 50-year period. And that was a number that we could live with and cope with and absorb and integrate. And I would not like to see us taking in more than 50,000 net migrants every year. I would like to see them being people who've got trades and skills, and maybe these Chinese are indeed highly educated people. I want them to be people who haven't got criminal records. In the case of the EU, we can't even block people who've had serious convictions in the past. And I would want them to be people who brought with them their own medical insurance. And if we got immigration to about those sort of numbers, this issue would cease to be the number one concern of the British people.
Well, it's the number one, it's a page one story for both the Sun and the Daily Mail.
Yes.
And the Mail has the line that Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond said, voters will choose to leave the EU unless there's a clampdown on migrant benefits. Is he right?
Yes, I mean, the point Paul was making was even the bit of migration that we have control over, we're handling pretty badly. But the fact we have no control over what comes from Europe, and that people know that, and that what we saw, and come on, let's be frank, it looks like up to 3 of the 8 murderers in Paris used the Greek islands as a route to come back in from Syria. So we do get onto security here very much. If the European Union's common asylum policy is allowing extremists and dangerous people to come into Europe and ultimately to take EU passports, and they can then come to Britain, I think that's as good a reason to vote against in a referendum than anything else. We move to Mark in Wanstead.
Oh, hello, Nigel.
Good morning.
Yeah, what I can't get my head around, Nigel, you get, like homegrown terrorists or whatever you call them, they go to Syria, right, they come back to the UK, they get off a plane, they're allowed to roam the streets of the UK as potential terrorists. Why aren't they locked up? Why aren't they arrested under the Terrorism Act?
Well, the government... No, you've got this all wrong, Mark. You haven't thought about this properly, I'm sorry. The government's priority is to take away the passports of those who want to go to Syria, to keep them here and prevent them from going. I think what the government should do is to make sure that anyone that's been to Syria has their passport removed and is not let back into the country. So, like you, I can't...
They become stateless.
No, they've joined the Islamic State. Good for them. Good luck.
Right, but they get back to Istanbul and they want to come home. You're not getting into Britain, chum.
I don't think so, no. I really don't. No, I really, really don't. Why would you want people who've been brutalised by that conflict coming back and, as Mark says, walking the streets? The estimate is there are 450 of these people in Britain today. I don't want them back.
Final question. Thank you for that. Final question will be from me. A new book is coming out, Mr. Farage. UKIP, Inside the Campaign to Redraw the Map of British Politics. And it hints that you have a rather testy relationship with your sole MP, Douglas Carswell. How would you define your relationship with Mr. Carswell?
Well, we're very different people. I mean, we're going to be side by side on this referendum campaign. We both want, a different Britain to the one we've got now. We want more public engagement and more referendums. But we have, we're completely different people.
In what way different, Mr. Farage?
We have different emphases. I felt in the general election campaign that the issue of open borders and immigration and ultimately security was the number one issue, and that we should major on that in the election, and Douglas took a different view.
Does he get it on immigration?
He has a very different view on immigration to me.
Does he get it?
We're different people. We're different people. Douglas is rather like a sort of a 19th century political late Victorian reformer. That is what Douglas is like. And they were great men and women who, changed this country, and we saw prison reform and votes for everybody and votes for women. And that is where Douglas comes from. He is a political reformer, and he sees the EU and immigration as being part of that reform process, whereas I see those things as being absolutely the main things we have to do.
And it is reported that a UKIP press officer, Mr. Farage, said that you became as toxic as the party, you personally.
Well, I
took
a lot of stick in the general election for saying I didn't believe in health tourism, and I thought that if anybody flew into Britain from anywhere in the world and had an HIV test that proved to be positive, that we would give them antiretroviral drugs costing £25,000 a year. And for that, I was pilloried. Do you know what? Since then, I've been written to by lots of HIV sufferers in this country who've said, you know what? Our local clinic is now unrecognisable, the number of people that are here. We're struggling to get the drugs we need, and of course HIV is it's a very emotive topic, but actually it takes you back to a basic question: is it the National Health Service or the International Health Service? So I took a load of stick over that. So, 6 months on, do people do people take those views as being outrageous? I don't think so.
Final question then: with whom would you rather share a pint this Sunday at the Horse and Groom? Douglas Carswell or Angela Merkel?
Oh, no, it'd be Douglas every time. There's no question about that. Look, he and I get on well. We are different people.
Jean-Claude Juncker or Douglas Carswell?
Oh, well, Juncker, I'd be in there all day.
But it's my job to put in place plans to keep them safe, and that's what we've been announcing over these few days. So the first thing I've done is to order that there will be more firearms officers available every day on the streets. We have armed response vehicles. I'm not going to say how many, for reasons that are obvious.